This is video 4 on Chapter 20, America's Hyperpower. So returning to Haiti, so remember this country was also an issue during George H.W. Bush's presidency. So just real quick, we want to talk about this vocabulary term called the Vietnam Syndrome. Remember, Vietnam did not particularly end well for the United States. If you've ever seen those short videos of where they had to airlift some of the remaining embassy staff out of the American embassy in Saigon. So a lot of people would say that we lost the Vietnam War. Again, that's always up to interpretation, right? You think about 60,000 American troops were killed during the conflict. Something like 2 million Vietnamese. Is that could you consider that a loss? It just sort of depends on perspective a lot. But at the end of the day, the communist North Vietnamese did end up taking over the rest of the country. In any case, how we apply it to Haiti. So this is a good sort of a piece from your book here, where thinking about this idea that never again the United States be gradually tiptoe into questionable wars without a clear-cut objective, overwhelming military force, and in-game strategy, and most important, support of Congress and the American people. Now, a lot of times, you could see this would not just relate to Haiti, but other issues as well. So a lot of the stuff you could think about comes from the Powell Doctrine, or of course, even today, people say, what are your overarching foreign policy goals? What are you trying to accomplish? That's always important to keep in mind. So this is a little bit of a difference from what happened during when Bush was president, that the United States does get involved, right? So the United States helps restore President Aristide to power there in Haiti. All right, so of course, some of these issues that were going on during, like Haiti during the Bush administration, continue on during the Clinton presidency. So your book goes into greater detail about how Clinton was seen as very much a foreign policy novice, right? He had been governor of Arkansas before. Not a whole lot of foreign policy stuff would we think about related to Arkansas. A lot of chicken farms and that type of thing, a lot of agriculture. So you could think about, although being governor does give you executive experience, right? Sort of being the CEO of a state, and then we sort of think about the president could be more compared to this as a CEO of the country. So it does give you some of that experience. But as far as dealing with something like should we intervene in Haiti or Yugoslavia, those kind of things, obviously he was not particularly prepared for some of those. So your book goes into greater detail about how he did become more comfortable, more knowledgeable in foreign policy very quickly, right? He surrounded himself with some very smart people, and kind of, so nowadays we often look at him as having actually quite a, great understanding of a lot of these issues facing the world today. So this country, Yugoslavia, collapses in 1991. And today, if you look at a map, there is no Yugoslavia. We don't have that. So it's split up based on these ethnic, religious divisions, right? So this book called "The Problem from Hell" came out, right? So actually, a book by an author named Samantha Power. She is actually currently our United States ambassador to the United Nations. So she kind of became more to prominence during this time. And obviously, Obama and Clinton are going to share, certain things as far as beliefs and foreign policy objectives. So she's currently in that position. So we also have this conflict in a small country called Bosnia-Herzegovina, right? So again, you can see the sort of religious conflict here. So Orthodox Serbs versus Catholic Croats versus Muslim Bosniaks, right? So you got a lot of stuff sort of going on there. So that ethnic religious divisions there, right? So, again, you sort of think about where would the United States interests sort of fall in there? You could see why policymakers here were sort of hesitant or reticent to get involved there. So we see a lot of sort of a term you might remember from international politics called buck passing the buck, meaning that it's sort of like the hot potato, like, oh, we don't want it, we'll pass it on to you. Oh, I don't want it, but keep sort of passing that buck around, shifting responsibility from one group to the next. So this is an instance of that, where the United States and Europe each kind of blame each other for inaction, saying, oh, it's their fault that they're not getting involved. So this, again, things kind of go from bad to worse there. So in July of '95, this is sort of a famous incident called Srebrenica, the Srebrenica massacre during that time. So again, a lot of times we don't think about sort of more or less white Europeans being Muslim, but there is actually kind of this large group of Bosnian Muslims there. So this was a group, I think a few thousand that were killed actually in a very, just a matter of a few days. They were killed in what it was supposedly a UN protected area, where the Dutch and other troops that were there under the auspices of the United Nations kind of cut and run, right? That they didn't feel like they could protect those people. So it was sort of a big, international incident, kind of like a black eye for the UN at that time. So again, just worldwide outrage, right? So horrific war crimes. There were videos and pictures of on TV of where the Serbs had kind of set up were more or less were concentration camps. So it looked very similar to say that what the Nazis did to the Jews and other people during World War II. So a lot of people were looking at this like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening again on European soil. So instead of sending troops in directly, the United States and NATO, right, so North Atlantic Treaty Organization, began this bombing campaign, right? So instead of sending our troops, we're sort of getting involved militarily, but more from the skies. So this eventually comes to a head and is resolved, at least temporarily anyway, with the Dayton Accords. So instead of I guess trying to keep everybody happy. So sometimes they just say, well, if these groups hate each other and they have a hard time getting along, sometimes it's easier just to do what's called partition. So instead of having everybody together, it just divided Bosnia into Muslim, Croat, and then Serb regions. So the NATO peacekeeping force would help keep that going. So then some of the other issues that were going on in this area. So again, there's a country today, Kosovo, which a lot of countries in the world still do not recognize, right? Because particularly if they're more on the side of of Serbia, of the Serbs, they have found it not in their interest to formally recognize this country. Still remains one of the poorest in Europe. There's actually some people like Bill Gates in the United States who have more money than the GDP of the entire country there. So a lot of times these places we have what we call a long memory, right? So the Serbs had a military defeat there. Let me look how far back this is, 1389, right? So think about that's 400 years before George Washington took office as president in 1789. So 400 years before that. These sort of tensions and rivalries and ethnic, religious conflict, some of these things can persist for many, many years. All right. So, again, thinking about the sort of more liberal perspective of international relations, focusing on diplomacy, conversations, negotiations, these type of things. So, unfortunately, Kosovo was not included in those Dayton Accords. So, kind of exploded afterwards, right? So, this sort of, you can see we're getting closer to the end of the millennium there. So, Yugoslavia was a huge issue throughout a lot of the 1990s. All right, so we've talked some about the different levels of analysis, right? So, of course, the individual, the domestic, and then the systemic or international level. So we think about, well, how, in some ways, can the domestic level also impact foreign policy? So President Clinton's legal issues related to his involvement with intern Monica Lewinsky, became a huge issue for our country as well. So if you remember from American politics, impeachment is actually a process from both the House and the Senate, right? So the House did vote to impeach him. So it passed that first stage, but once it went to the Senate, they acquitted him of those impeachment charges. So obviously he was able to stay in office throughout for the rest of his term. So if you look at that date there, if you remember from that course, we also talked about, the election, the 2000 election was already getting into gear there, so maybe things would have been different if he was earlier on in his term, but a lot of Republicans saw, the next election was coming up shortly, and obviously at this time Clinton was not up for re-election, so they, maybe didn't find that impeachment would be so important. All right. So continued NATO intervention in this area, right? So bombing campaign and so forth. So then just a little personal thing as far as, war and study abroad. So I spent my junior year as an undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill in Heidelberg, Germany. So it was kind of fall 1998, spring 1999 semester. So you can see this is right in there, March 1999. So, for example, one of my good friends there who went to another university in North Carolina, another student that lived in his kind of apartment area was from this area, and one day she got very angry with him because she said the United States had bombed the factory where her boyfriend or husband or something worked, and there was a lot of people dead and those kind of things. So it was sort of an interesting time to be over there. He obviously tried to say, well, I didn't have anything to do with that and these type of things, but sometimes if you do get the experience to travel abroad, sometimes the U.S. foreign policy decision can, in a lot of ways, affect you personally. Your relationships with people, because they, unfortunately, will kind of see you as some kind of representative, often, of the United States. All right, so how does some of this stuff ended up? All right, so the Milosevic was this dictator, right? This kind of Serbian nationalist guy. So he does that lose the 2000 election. So there's this major tribunal set up. So the UN International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So if you click on this link, you can see that this is still active. All right, I mean they are actually still trying. I mean even today, and they are trying to convict and try, and investigate some of these characters from this time for war crimes, right? Crimes against humanity, for mass murder, these type of things. So it's a very long process for a lot of this stuff. Now, of course, some of those people have eluded capture during this time, right? That they've changed identities or whatever they might have been able to do. Say generals or other high up military people that were trying to not be to not be caught. So some people say it was justice, others not. That this guy Milosevic, who was blamed for a lot of the troubles in Yugoslavia, that he dies during the trial. So he did die in prison, but a lot of people thought he never really got the sentence that he should have. All right. So there's this kind of question mark here next to what we call the Clinton doctrine. So is this something that you think about? Is there a way to sort of summarize what Clinton was all about? So this is from your book where it says U.S. would employ its power in cases of humanitarian disaster where the costs seem manageable and the prospects for success reasonable. Like again, think about those end goals and what are you trying to accomplish there. All right, so we're looking at some of the more diplomacy, sort of liberal perspective stuff. So we have what's called the Oslo Accords, right? So these talks between, moving more to the Middle East here, so talks between Israel and what we call the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO. So there, some of the stuff happens through what we call back channels, right? So not so public, but kind of more hush-hush, more secretive. But it does move more towards big public agreements. So Israel does agree to withdraw from these two major Palestinian areas, so the Gaza Strip and then the West Bank, and Israel and PLO recognize each other. But as we see, this does not end the dispute. Of course, that's still going on today. Some of these things have a extremely long lifetime to them. So again, we're looking at sort of these different levels of analysis. So it could be fault of individuals, like Arafat was the leader of the PLO. So he did reject the deal. Some of the key provisions of the deal. What about domestic issues? Say between Israelis and Palestinians, or great powers. How did maybe use the United States, Europe, and elsewhere? How are those countries to blame as well? All right, so you can see again the Israelis. So this would be Arafat here. So Clinton welcoming there at the White House there. This was sort of towards the end of his presidency, and he thought this is one of the things he really wanted to be remembered for. All right. So then just to finish up real quick, so you see, even though he came in as a novice, right, says surprisingly full, given his early hesitancy in his president election or more emphasis on domestic policy. So we see, nuclear cooperation, NATO enlarges. There's a new peace treaty between the United States and Japan. So this is another sort of good quote here, that he was a foreign policy minimalist, doing as little as possible, as late as possible, as place after place. So again, a lot of people would say that's particularly not the best strategy, but maybe say, well, it worked for him. All right, so then, what are some of the legacy? Just to finish up. So of course we see international terrorism, Islamic terrorism start up after this time. Bin Laden comes on the stage, right? These kind of things.